All right, J-Nuck, how we doing? Yeah. Okay, that's a bit better than what I expected the day after the party. That's good. Everybody look around for a second. These are the bravest warriors of J-Nuck, the people that show up to a session the morning after the J-Nuck party. Hope you all had a great time last night. My name is Zach Halliwell. I'm a learning experience designer here at Jamf. You might recognize my voice from greatest hits such as the Jamf 100 course or the Jamf Online Training Catalog. If you don't, I'll only be mildly offended. That's fine. We're not going to see each other again after today, and I'll forget about it. Anyways, today we are here to talk about MDM and DDM 101. If you need any live translation or captioning, you can scan that QR code. If you miss it before the slide goes away, I've got a little placard at my table in the back left. Back left of the room. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Rich Troughton, Principal Client Engineer here at Jamf.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for choosing to spend this time here. I know I'm up against several really great sessions, so thank you so much. So we're here to talk about MDM and DDM, but what do those mean? Well, before we get into that, there are two things I'd like to mention. The first is that all the slides, speakers, notes, and the demos are available for download, and I'll be providing a link at the end of the talk. I tend to be one of those folks who can't keep up with the speaker and take notes at the same time, so for those folks in the same situation, no need to take notes. Absolutely everything I'm going to be talking about is going to be available for download. So to pick back up on what I was talking about before, I'm going to be using the following acronyms frequently during this talk, DDM and MDM. Here is what they stand for. If you don't understand what they mean now, hopefully you will by the end of the talk. So let's start by getting on the same page. What is MDM? In the context of Apple devices, mobile device management, or MDM, is a delivery mechanism for delivering data and settings to Apple devices. So this includes Macs, iPhones, iPads, Apple TVs, Apple Watches, and Vision Pros. So more specifically, MDM is an API for sending device management commands. Now, not all of those commands are backwards compatible, so MDM commands for a specific OS version and later, they won't work on earlier OS versions. When did MDM enter the picture? Well, Apple first rolled it out starting with iOS 4, and it came to Apple's other platforms in the OS version shown on the screen. So you can use MDM to push email, security settings, applications, app settings, certificates, and even media content to Apple devices. And there's two major components to MDM. There's Apple's push notification service, and then there's the MDM server used to manage those devices. So let's take a look at APNs first. So when you take your new Apple device out of the box and power it on for the first time, it doesn't yet know how to connect to APNs. Now, this is because it may have been sitting in the box for a while, and Apple wants to make sure that it's getting the latest information. What the Apple device does know is the address of the initialization server. And it's supposed to talk to it, and it'll download what's called a bag file. Now, the bag file is a plist that contains the necessary data for the Apple device to start talking to APNs. Now that the Apple device knows how and where to start talking to APNs, it opens a connection and says hello. APNs says hello back, and it provides a certificate. The device checks the certificate and verifies that it's valid, telling the device that APNs can be trusted to communicate with. Now, the device has an Apple-issued device certificate, so once the device is verified that the certificate provided by APNs is valid, it sends that device certificate up to APNs. APNs will check the certificate that's been provided by the device, and they'll verify that it's valid, and that tells APNs that the device can be trusted to communicate with. Now, once both sides know that the opposite end can be trusted, they will exchange cryptographic ciphers, and they'll start a conversation. Now, APNs will be used by Apple devices regardless of whether or not they're enrolled in a mobile device management service or not. So for the various apps on your Apple device that use push notifications, APNs is how those notifications are getting to your device. Now, APNs also requires having certain ports opened outbound. Outbound's important when you're talking to your network folks. Details are available via the link in the screen. This will probably be the part of the KBase article where your InfoSec and Firewall folks may start shaking their heads and saying things like, no, can't do this. Now, for those folks having that argument with their security or network folks, here are some important facts to know. Now, in the event that your network or security folks absolutely won't do it, Apple does provide a more restricted set of IPv4 and IPv6 ranges to use. Now, once the argument is over and they've agreed to open up the needed ports, you might find they didn't actually open up all the needed ports. So to check this, Apple makes a great diagnostic tool called the Mac Evaluation Utility, which can verify that your devices can connect to Apple services. It's available via Apple's Apple Seed for IT program. Now, for more information on APNs and how it works, I would really encourage you to check out Brad Chapman's talk on the subject. It was given at Jamf Nation User Conference in 2017, and it's available via the link on the screen. So now let's turn our attention to the other half of device management, and that's the MDM server. So what's an MDM server? When you get down to it, it's an HTTP server which responds to communication with either a plist containing a command or HTTP 200, which is the OK response. Most traffic between a device and the MDM server it's enrolled with are going to be plists being sent back and forth. Now, depending on the contents of the plist, some of what's being passed will be digitally signed or encrypted. So for example, this is what a request from the MDM server for a device inventory may look like. And this is what a command from the MDM to install a certain management profile may look like. Now, an MDM server also needs certificates. There are two types of certificates specifically used by MDM servers. There's the APNs vendor certificate and the APNs push certificate. So the first is going to be the APNs vendor certificate. So this is a special certificate used to generate the certificate signing request for an APNs push certificate prior to uploading the request to Apple for an APNs certificate. Now, for folks familiar with Jamf Pro, you may have seen this as part of setting up or renewing your APNs push certificate. So as part of the APNs setup or renewal, you can select the option of downloading a signed CSR from Jamf Nation. Now, once you've provided the necessary credentials, a signed certificate request for APNs is then downloaded to your Mac. So what's happening in the background is that your Jamf Pro server is communicating with a backend system with access to the APNs vendor certificate to generate that certificate request for your Jamf Pro server. What's generated is an encrypted plist, which is ready for uploading to Apple's push certificates portal. So that brings us to the APNs push certificate. This is the one that you guys are usually involved with. So this is a special certificate used by MDM servers to communicate with APNs. So if you've ever set up or renewed an APNs push certificate, you've used the site referenced on the screen. It's where you take the certificate request generated by your MDM and you use it to get a push notification certificate. So your ability to generate a push notification certificate is tied to an Apple ID, which you would use to log into the portal site. When it comes to the Apple ID used for your APNs certificates, I have some short do's and don'ts to keep in mind. When possible, you should try to have one Apple ID per APNs certificate, and please make sure you have this documented. You should also make sure that you're not using a personal Apple ID or one tied to your work email address. If you can, have a dedicated email mailbox set up just for the Apple IDs involved. Also, really important, please do not lose the password for the Apple ID in question. Now that said, if you do lose the password for that Apple ID, Apple does have a process for transferring APNs certificates to another Apple ID. I have a blog post on how to do this available via the link on the screen. Now, to show what can happen if you don't follow those rules, here's what the portal looks like when I log in with my personal Apple ID. I've got 2 active APNs certificates, and I have to figure out which specific APNs certificate goes with my MDM server. This is important for reasons I'll be discussing in a bit. So I think I've got the right one figured out, so let's upload that CSR. Okay, great. I've got a new APNs push certificate. Let's download it and get it over to my MDM server. Oh, well, that looks bad. What happened? Well, Apple's push notification service is a chain of trust with multiple security factors built into that chain. So the first part is the certificate that I received from the push certificate portal. Now, when inspected, the certificate looks like this. The second part is what's known as the topic, which is a specific UUID identifier associated with your MDM server. The certificate generated by the push notification portal will include the topic in both the common name and user ID fields of the certificate. This information is also visible if you click the info button next to the relevant certificate on the portal page. And the topic is also embedded in the MDM profile that your MDM server issues to your Apple device, with the topic field listing the user ID field of the APNs push certificate. So to circle back with my earlier problem with the push notification certificate, I had accidentally created a new push certificate for my MDM instead of renewing my existing one. Because the topic is a UUID, it will be unique per MDM push notification certificate, and it can only be included in push notification certificates if that certificate is being renewed. Oops. Well, fortunately, my MDM had warned me before I actually uploaded that new certificate with a different topic. If I'd gone ahead and uploaded it, I would have broken the middle of my trusted chain of certificates. All devices enrolled with my MDM would have instantly, right away, lost the ability to communicate with the server because MDM would no longer be able to point them to the correct MDM server. So once I went back, created a new CSR, and made sure to renew the correct APNs certificate this time, everything's fine. So with that knowledge, let's take a look at how the MDM server talks to APNs. Like an Apple device, it opens a connection and it says hello. APNs says hello back and responds with a certificate. So the MDM server will check the certificate and verify that it's valid, telling the server that APNs can be trusted to communicate with. The MDM server now sends the APNs push certificate that it was issued by the Apple push certificate portal. APNs will check that push notification certificate it's been sent, verifies that it's valid, and that will tell APNs that the MDM can be trusted to communicate with. And just like a device, once both sides know that the opposite end can be trusted, they'll exchange cryptographic ciphers and they'll start a conversation. However, the push certificate and the topic are not the end of the chain of certificates. The last link for devices is what's known as the device token. This token is generated by APNs and it's unique to the individual device. These tokens are the same kinds of tokens that APNs assigns to applications that use push notifications. So in this case, the application in question is your MDM server. But how does the device get the token from APNs and know to forward it to the MDM server? Well, this happens as part of MDM enrollment. The device will connect to the MDM server and send in an enrollment request. As part of the enrollment process, the MDM configuration profile is downloaded to the device. The device is now managed by the MDM server and is able to communicate securely. And now that the MDM profile is in place on the device registers itself with APNs using the topic. APNs then generates a token based on the combination of the device ID and the MDM topic. And once APNs has generated that token, it is sent down to the device. Once the token is sent to the device by APNs, the device then forwards it to the MDM server. Once the MDM server has it, that token is associated with the MDM's record for that device. Now, the device token may change occasionally. When a change is detected, the device will automatically check in with the MDM server to report the new token. So along with the token generated by APNs, the device itself also generates a unique string known as push magic. So this is sent to the MDM server, and it's associated with the MDM's record for the device. So the push magic value is a UUID, which ensures that the MDM server is talking to the right device when it's sending commands. So now that everything involved has the right cryptographic trust relationships in place to communicate securely with each other, let's use that to send commands to our managed devices. So first step is the MDM server creating a notification payload using the token and push magic of the device that it wants to send something to. Next, APNs is going to forward the notification to that device. The device will verify that the topic, token, and push magic match, and then it'll accept that notification. The device will send feedback via APNs that it successfully received and decoded the information. And in response to the notification, the device will now check in with the MDM and gets whatever command or configuration settings the MDM has for it. So one thing that's important to understand is that no management data ever goes over APNs. APNs is only ever used as a trigger mechanism to make the device ask its MDM for commands to run. So this genericness is what allows APNs to be used by everybody who needs to send push notifications, because APNs is only ever telling the device to check in with what originally generated that notification. APNs is also pretty secure because of its verification scheme. By the time an APNs notification reaches its target device, it is relying on the push notification certificate being valid, the topic being valid, the token being valid, and the push magic string being valid. If any of those are not valid, that notification is discarded by the device. So that's MDM, which we've all been using for over a decade to manage Apple devices. What can you do with mobile device management? Well, as mentioned earlier, you can use MDM to push email, security settings, applications, app settings, certificates, and media content to Apple devices. So let's look at a common use case, which is providing security settings to enable the firewall included with macOS. So for example, we've been given the requirement that all Macs in our environment need to have the firewall turned on, with incoming connections only allowed for software included with macOS or apps which have been signed, and the firewall is otherwise set not to respond to incoming requests. So you can create an MDM profile to configure these settings and then distribute it. In this case, I'm using iMazing's profile editor tool, which is available via the link on the screen, to create this particular profile. So once it's created, what you have is a plist file with the desired settings. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if a desired setting is the default behavior for macOS, the policy won't necessarily, this profile won't necessarily include that setting. For example, if the requirement for the firewall includes blocking all incoming connections, including incoming connections for software included with macOS or apps that have been signed, you'll see additional settings added to the profile when it's created. So in this case, in iMazing Profile Editor, I'm unchecking those options to allow those incoming connections. Once created, what you have is a plist file that was similar to what I showed before, but it now includes the settings to block incoming connections for software included with macOS or apps which have been signed. Those new settings weren't previously included because the default behavior on macOS is to allow those connections, and thus the profile didn't need to manage them. The OS was already doing it. So once your profile is created, you would upload it to your MDM server. So in this case, I'm using Jamf Pro for my MDM service. Different MDM services are going to handle this differently, but in Jamf Pro, you can look at and potentially edit the settings for your firewall profile after uploading it. Once uploaded, you can deploy it to a Mac, which is managed by this MDM server. Before the profile is deployed to a Mac, the firewall is off and all incoming connections are allowed. The MDM now deploys the profile, and the settings in the profile get applied to the managed Mac. Now that the profile has been installed, the firewall is on, and new information about what is allowed and what is blocked is displayed. If we click on the Options button, we'll get access to additional settings. Looking at the additional settings, we can see that the firewall has been configured in accordance with the requirements we were given. Firewall is turned on, incoming connections only allowed for apps included with macOS or signed apps, and the firewall is otherwise set not to respond to incoming requests. Meanwhile, because this is being managed by a profile, the user of the managed Mac doesn't have the ability to change those settings. All toggles, menu items, and other control interfaces are grayed out and inaccessible. Now, another common use case is using Apple's Volume Purchase Program, or VPP, to provide applications that are installed via MDM. VPP is the previous name. It's now called Apps and Books, but I've been dealing with VPP longer, so I'm going to keep calling it VPP. So for more information on it, please see the link on the bottom of the screen. But essentially what this is doing is using your MDM server as a way to install apps using MDM commands. So let's take a look at this using Apple's Configurator app, which is available via the Mac App Store and also via VPP. So in this example, I'm using Jamf Pro for my MDM service, and I'm setting up Configurator to use Jamf Pro self-service to provide an on-demand installation of Configurator. So in this case, I'm using Self-Service Plus, and once it's finished installing, I get this nice open button, just like you get on the Mac App Store. And that was it. Got delivered by an MDM command, and now Apple should be updating Configurator in the background. Now, on the MDM side, we can see that there was an MDM command sent to install Configurator. And on the Mac side, we can see the configurator is installed. So now that we've discussed MDM and some of the use cases for it, what's Declarative Device Management, or DDM? This is the new stuff. Well, here's what it is. It's a new data management paradigm which uses a declarative data model, which is designed to address and avoid performance and scaling issues commonly seen with mobile device management. Here's what it is not. It is not a new protocol. DDM has been added to the MDM management protocol to make switching to DDM easier. When can you use DDM? Well, Apple first rolled it out starting with iOS 15, and it came to Apple's other platforms in the OS versions shown on the screen. Why is it? Well, to make a long story very short, MDM without DDM is a very server-focused management protocol. The endpoints are told to check in with their MDM server. The endpoints do. The server tells them to do something. Over and over, endpoint checks in. Server tells the endpoint to do something, and the endpoint does it. The server in this scenario is pretty much doing all the work. The endpoint's role is doing what the server tells it to do. Now, Apple wants to make sure that the MDM protocol remains responsive and scales to meet a growing population of devices, so they're making some necessary changes. So DDM is designed to take some of the load off of the server by moving some of the management to the endpoints. With DDM, the endpoint is being given more responsibility for managing itself and deciding when to report information back to the management server. Now, this change does three things right away. One, it reduces the network resources needed for MDM communication. Second, it reduces load on the management server. And three, it is saving time overall because more of it is being handled on the device. So like MDM, DDM uses a structured data model. So let's take a look at what it looks like, starting with declarations. So declarations are the policies sent to a device, and they have a structure that looks like this. And surprise, this is now JSON in place of the earlier XML. So type identifies the policy that the declaration is using. Identifier provides a unique identifier for the declaration in the form of a UUID. Server token provides a unique identifier for the current version of the declaration based on the identifier value in the declaration. This will also be in the form of a UUID. And payload contains the settings for the policy being sent by the declaration. So as a quick review, here's all that makes up the structure of a declaration. So let's dig into the various declaration types. So the first type is the configuration type, and this should be pretty familiar. It's a policy definition. This is similar to what's used in MDM profiles. So next there are assets, and the data, these are data needed by a configuration, like MDM URLs, certificates, emails, or contact information, stuff like that. Here's how an asset looks in a declaration. In this case, we're using an email address. Now, the great thing about assets in DDM is that they can have a one-to-many relationship. So one asset can be used for multiple configurations. So this is a great advantage for DDM configurations over MDM profiles, as MDM currently requires that resources for that profile need to be available in that profile. For example, if you need to have the same certificate for authentication for both Wi-Fi and VPN, that means you need to have your Wi-Fi and VPN configuration in the same profile as your certificates, or maybe you're duplicating the same certificates in the profiles used to configure Wi-Fi and VPN on your devices. In addition, anytime we would need to update a certificate in this scenario, it's necessary to remove and reinstall the profile. Now, especially in the case of a Wi-Fi profile update, I'm sure a lot of folks are familiar with this scenario. It may mean that removing that profile is removing the Mac's only way of communicating back to the MDM server. So you get to the part where the profile gets yanked, and then nothing. So with this one-to-many relationship, you can change one asset, and it'll update in all the configurations that reference it. So this is a huge step forward in terms of functionality, because now we can make incremental updates to a configuration without having to re-push it. So going back to the Wi-Fi profile issue I just mentioned, this should mean that Wi-Fi stays up and working the whole time during that update process. Should. Fingers crossed. So activations are a group of configurations that get applied to a device. They also specify the logic that determines how and when the policies defined by the configurations get applied to the managed device. So these configurations are also applied atomically to device, such that the system applies all reference configurations together, or it applies none of them. So all the configurations and assets referenced by this configuration must be valid in order for the system to apply the activation. If you have an invalid configuration or an invalid asset defined in a configuration, nothing happens. None of the configurations get applied. Activations in DDM can also have a many-to-many relationship, where configurations can be referenced by multiple activations. So one activation can hit multiple configurations at once, and a configuration can be used by multiple activations. So this means that you can be having your device process complex business logic, while DDM means that the devices are handling this logic autonomously in place of the server having to handle all of this for all the devices. So along with activations, we get what's called predicates. So these determine the activation state, if active or not, on a device. So this is going to use Boolean logic, and an activation will only be processed by a device if the predicate evaluates to true. So here's an example of our previous activation declaration where the predicate is set to evaluate to true only on iPads. So the final kind of declaration is a management declaration. Management declarations are used to send overall management state to the device. So this includes a declaration describing details about the organization, as well as a declaration describing the capabilities of the MDM server. So these declarations are helpful for conveying static data to the device, which shouldn't change. So those are our 4 types of declarations. But there's more to dig into, so next let's look at DDM's status channel. So in the DDM communication model, there's communication between the management server and the device going on, but there's less communication because of the status channel. Status channel is a way for the server to subscribe to only the information that your server needs. So once the server has subscribed to those specific status items, the client will report to the server only on those status items. So this model of endpoint to server communication cuts way back on unnecessary chatter, which happens with MDM, and it provides the server with only the information that it actually needs. So status items are identified by key paths, which consist of period-separated string tokens, and examples of these are shown on the screen. So here's how a status channel subscription may look. And a response from the endpoint may look like this. So Apple's products have a long life cycle, so it's essential to maintain compatibility between different versions of an MDM solution with Apple devices at various ages and capabilities. So declarative management means that both the device and the MDM server are now advertising their supported capabilities to each other. So each side of the management system is now aware of what the other side supports because each side is advertising their supported capabilities to each other. So each side knows when it can start taking advantage of new features. These advertisements include a list of supported features representing both major and minor protocol updates. So this will mean that the endpoint will advertise its supported payloads, including the full set of declarations and status items supported by that device. Meanwhile, the MDM server is likewise advertising its capabilities to the endpoint. When the endpoint gets updated, gets new capabilities, it's letting the server know. When the MDM server gets updated, it's letting the endpoints know, hey, I've got new stuff. So this is going to be a great big help overall, because now it means that over the long life cycle of Apple devices and MDM solutions, they'll be able to keep each other up to date with what's going on. So DDM is integrated into the MDM protocol, like I mentioned previously, and it uses it for managing the enrollment and unenrollment process, for like handling the HTTP transport communication, and also for device and user authentication. DDM is essentially using MDM as its tunnel when communicating to devices. Now, DDM should not interfere with existing MDM behavior, except when Apple says it does, and I'll be covering a little bit more about that. So declarations, in fact, leverage existing MDM behaviors using an MDM command for activation and an MDM check-in request for synchronization and status reports. So this is intended to ease the migration from MDM to DDM. So in fact, you can send an existing MDM profile as part of a configuration. So this allows profiles to be used with DDM, which in turn means you can shift profile-based logic to an endpoint without having to rework your profiles. So just in fact to show you that is in fact turtles all the way down, this means in some cases you could have added a setting as a managed preference to Workgroup Manager in macOS 10.3 Panther server in 2003. Later moved that managed preference setting into a profile in macOS 10 Lion using profile support for MCX settings. And now, 20 years after adding that setting for the first time to Workgroup Manager, you can use DDM to deploy that profile with that MCX setting. Why do we care about this? What can you do with declarative device management? Why has this man just been going on and on and on? Well, first of all, let's take a look at what's available in macOS Tahoe and iOS 26. So software updates are manageable via DDM and can enforce deploying a specified OS version and build, which must be installed by a specified time. So to ease migration, DDM software update commands can coexist with their counterpart MDM commands for managing software updates. That said, DDM management is going to take precedence in this case over MDM commands. So this is one of those cases where DDM should not interfere with existing MDM behavior, except where Apple says it does. I mean, I don't know about you, but this is what I look like when I found out about DDM software updates. So DDM can also help out with app deployments, with options for apps being sent to the device before a specified time and only made available once the app is needed. DDM also enables the option for the app to being shown without actually being installed. So that gives the user the choice about when to install it. Now, one benefit about this is since the user is choosing to install for unsupervised devices, there's no extra consent dialog that appears. They're choosing to hit the device, therefore they're consenting. So on macOS Sonoma and later, DDM configurations can be used to specify sets of tamper-resistant system configuration files for different system services on macOS. In their session at WWDC 2023, Apple mentioned that the built-in services listed on the screen could be managed that way, and that remains the current list as in macOS Tahoe. So DDM also provides improved file vault status monitoring with a status item which will return true or false Boolean values. So on macOS Sequoia and later, DDM configurations can also be used to specify sets of tamper-resistant files that run tasks. So in this case, you're choosing whatever tool you want to run a task along with the launch agent if you want that to run as the logged in user, or you would be providing a launch daemon if you want to run that task as root. So what can you do today with DDM? Well, as mentioned, I was pretty happy about the improvements for managing software updates. So let's take a look at that use case using blueprints to send a software update declaration to update to macOS Tahoe. So to do this, I would need to log into Jamf Pro and select blueprints. From there, I would click the tile for update software to the latest version. This also got referenced during the keynote. So let's take a look at how this works. So when prompted, provide a name for the configuration. For this example, I'm using update to macOS 26.0. Next, you'll need to select a Jamf Pro smart or static group that you want to deploy the software update declaration to. For this example, I'm selecting a static group named Manage Software Update Deployment Group. Next, you'll need to provide the necessary information. As mentioned in the keynote, the automatically keep your stuff up to date, that's coming soon. This is what's currently available in the product. So I'm choosing to set a deadline of September 16th at 8:15 a.m. to update Macs to macOS Tahoe 26.0. You can also choose to provide a website link with information about the update, but I'm skipping that in this example. So once everything has been configured, you would click the deploy button to send those changes to the Macs you want to manage. And once deployed, the blueprint screen in Jamf Pro should now show the newly created update to macOS 26 blueprint as being deployed. Now on your managed devices, you can verify that the new software update plan has been deployed by clicking on the enrollment profile and then scrolling to the bottom. You should see a device declaration section with the listing for software update. And if you click on the software update listing, you'll see details about the plan. So what's this look like from the user's end? Well, they'll get this notification, and they'll have two choices. One is details, and the other is update. If they click on details, it'll open up system settings to software update, and it'll show you that it's working on it. So let's see how it looks when you choose to go forward with the update now. I'm going to be speeding up time considerably, as this could take up to 30 minutes or more to complete. So in this case, I got the notification. I'm telling it I want to do it now. Yes, I want to restart. It's prompting me for a password, which is going to be the password for my volume user, volume owner, since that's the one who's authorized to do software update tasks. And just like that, much faster than in real life, I'm now on Tahoe. And it did exactly what I told it to. Got the device up to macOS 26, everything's fine. So if you notice, as part of the update process, it asks for the logged in user's credentials to authenticate installing that software update. What if nobody had been logged in? What if it had just been sitting at the login screen? Well, in that case, the MDM would have provided what's called a bootstrap token to provide the needed authentication to run that software update. So for more information on bootstrap tokens and how they work in this scenario, please see the link at the bottom of the screen. So another use case is, as previously discussed, DDM configurations can be used to specify tamper-resistant system configuration files for specified services on macOS. So let's take a look at how you can deploy a sudo configuration using Jamf Pro and its blueprints functionality. So by default, macOS Tahoe ships with a sudo configuration that looks like this. We're going to change the following following line. And it's now going to read as follows. So what this change does is it removes the ability for all users of the admin group to use all available privileges for the sudo tool. So in its place, only a user account with the account short name of other user has all available privileges for the sudo tool. So to deploy this change with blueprints, three things are needed. One, you're going to need a zip file with both the directory and the file structure, the configuration file in question. In this case, I'm going to create a directory called etc and a file inside called sudoers. So the reason for this is that when it deploys out to the device, the OS is going to be implicitly looking at the contents of the zip file to figure out where it should be handling this stuff. So it's very important to recreate for your managed configuration file the same directory structure that macOS is expecting. So for this example, we'll name the zip file as sudoers configuration.zip. The second thing we'll need is the SHA-256 hash of the zip file. So you can use the SHA-256 sum command line tool to get the SHA-256 hash of the zip file. So using a command similar to the one shown on the screen should provide that information as an alphanumeric string. The last thing is a place to download the zip file from, which allows downloading without authentication. So for this example, I've set up an S3 bucket in Amazon Web Services, and I've set the zip file to be downloadable by anybody from that S3 bucket. So once I have all those items available, I can set up a blueprint in Jamf Pro to deploy the sudo configuration file as a service configuration file. So to do this, I would need to log into Jamf Pro and select blueprints. From there, I would click the tile for service configuration. Now, when prompted, provide a name for that configuration, and in this example, I'm using sudo configuration. Next, you'll need to select a Jamf Pro smart or static group that you want to use, and in this case, I'm selecting a static group called sudo configuration deployment group. Lastly, you'll need to provide the necessary information to download that sudoers configuration.zip file. So for this, you'll need to provide an HTTPS URL for downloading the file, the SHA-256 hash, and set the service definition to sudo. So once everything has been configured, you click the deploy button to deploy the changes to the Macs you want to manage. And once deployed, should show that everything, that your configuration is deployed, it's now going out to your managed devices. So on your managed devices, just like with the software update, you should be able to verify that the new sudo configuration has been deployed by clicking on the enrollment profile and then scrolling to the bottom. You should see that device declaration section with a listing for configuration files com apple sudo. And if you click on the listing, it should provide the path to the tamper-resistant directory where it stored that new sudo configuration file. So inside the directory you see listed on the screen will be that etc directory containing the sudoers file that you configured for the blueprints zip file. So you will not be able to write to this location as it is protected by system integrity protection. But you should be able to read from that file and thus be able to verify that the configuration you have in place is the one you're expecting. And you should also be able to verify that only the other user account can now use the sudo tool. So one more use case is, as previously discussed, DDM can be used to deploy MDM configuration profiles. So let's take a look at how you can deploy a configuration profile with device restrictions using Jamf Pro and its blueprints functionality. So I can set up a blueprint in Jamf Pro to deploy a configuration profile with device restrictions. So to do this, first, of course, log into Jamf Pro, select blueprints. There isn't a template option available for this. So what I'm going to need to do is actually go and click that Create Blueprint button. So when prompted, provide a name for the configuration. And in this example, I'm using restriction settings for macOS. At this point, you should see an unconfigured blueprint. And from here, we scroll down in the list on the left-hand side of the browser window to locate the restrictions component. And from here, we click and drag the restrictions component to the declaration group section. You would need to mouse over the restrictions component, and you'll see a configure button appear. Click the configure button, and you'll be able to edit the restrictions component. So at this point, you'll see all available restriction settings which are available for Apple platforms. Now, fortunately, we can filter this list using the filter button, which is marked in red. So let's use the example of blocking these Apple Intelligence functions on managed Macs. For those, we can filter for just those settings, which apply to just macOS and Apple Intelligence. And then we can find and select the following options, set them to false, and save our changes. Now we have a blueprint which has all the settings configured, but no target scope has been set. So to scope this blueprint, we would go to the scope section and click the arrow button. So for this example, I'm selecting a static group called Restrictions Deployment Group. As mentioned previously, you can use smarter static groups for this. I'm just choosing to use a static group. And once the desired group or groups have been set and verified for the scope, you would click the Save button. And once everything has been configured, as before, click the Deploy button, and the changes for the Macs that you want to manage will go out. And at that point, you should be good to go. Restriction settings are going out, but let's take a look at what this looks like on the device side. So on your managed devices, again, you click on the enrollment profile, scroll down to the bottom, and you should see a profile section in device declarations. So in the profile section, there should be a listing with a name that matches the name of the blueprint that was deployed. And if you click on the restriction settings for macOS listing, which matches the name of our blueprint, you should see the details of what's being managed, which in this case are the Apple Intelligence restrictions that we just put in place. But if you notice, nothing else is being managed. With blueprints for the restrictions profile option, only the settings that you want to deploy are going to be deployed. So one thing that DDM is not as of yet is configuration management akin to that provided by Puppet, Ansible, Salt, or other solutions. With those solutions, the configuration management server provides a plan to the managed endpoint, and the endpoint makes sure that the configuration is applied no matter what. This includes automatically reverting changes to managed settings made by the end user on that endpoint. Now, as of now, DDM's ability to report changes via status channel means that automatic reporting of changes is there, but automatic remediation that would be handled by the endpoint is not. I really hope this is coming to DDM, but we are not there yet. Now, do you as a Mac or an iOS admin need to know all this stuff about MDM and DDM? No. This is the stuff that we as your MDM vendor need to know. However, understanding what's going on with MDM and DDM means that you all know what to ask for from your vendors when Apple rolls out new stuff to say, we want this and we want this now. So looking ahead, I specifically see DDM as providing us as Mac admins with a deeper and wider toolkit than we've had before, which is a great thing. And because you can never have too much information about stuff that's new to you, I've got some useful links. Got some more useful links. Got some more useful links. And hopefully the most useful links you see in this entire presentation, because this is how you get it all. PDF with the slides and speakers notes are available from the top link. Keynote slides, which contain the slides, the presenters notes, the demos, the everything I've been talking about, are available via the link at the bottom of the screen. And I think we just ran out of time. But let's make some time for like 1 or 2 questions. Just 1 or 2 questions. Yes.
I'm coming.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. With that example with the sudoers file, that you're uploading the zip file and you have to specify an HTTPS location for it, do you know if there's any plans to just use your current Jamf repository?
I know that is something that is being asked for by a lot of people. I do not have specifics on if and when it's being implemented, but I know that is definitely something we've heard from customers, and
Okay.
It's been heard loud and clear.
All right, thank you.
All right, gentleman in the purple shirt in the back, and gentleman who also had his hand raised, we will also get you, but that's going to be it for questions because I don't want to keep people from lunch. I will be outside following the presentation for anybody else who has questions.
How soon do you expect the conversions of compliance benchmarks and DDM? Because I know that currently under compliance they're going out as MDM. Do we see that changing soon?
So this is like for the macOS security config. That's going to be up to them. We'll see. I know Apple is really pushing to get everything over to DDM as quickly as possible, but folks outside of Apple are going to move at their own pace.
Where was that last question?
That gentleman right there with his hand raised.
With the software deployment, what's best practice as far as volume? Is this something you can push to 10,000 users? Is it, what's the limits?
So are we talking MDM like we were doing it via VPP or what?
Like a blueprint software update.
Here's where the fact that the communication is more spread out really comes into play. I'm not aware of an upward limit right now. It should be just fine. Basically, if your current solution can handle doing it by MDM, it should be able to handle it via DDM without a problem.
All right, that sounds great. If anybody has any more questions for Rich, he'll be
I'll be
available
outside
the room. Otherwise, give it up for Rich. And thanks for coming to JNUC, everybody. I hope you all have a safe trip home. Go get some lunch. And yeah, see you next year.